The restaurant was alive with the quiet hum of conversations and the clinking of silverware. It was the kind of place where every detail was polished to perfection, from the soft glow of the chandeliers to the careful arrangement of flowers on each table. The waitstaff moved like a well-practiced dance, balancing trays of food and drinks with practiced ease. Among them was a young waitress who had grown used to this environment, though it was far from easy. She had worked long hours to pay her bills, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity and a friendly smile that seemed to put even the most impatient diners at ease. On this particular evening, the restaurant was especially busy. Reservations had filled every corner, and there was a sense of excitement in the air, mixed with the faint aroma of fresh bread and roasted dishes. She moved from table to table, taking orders, refilling water glasses, and answering questions with patience. Every so often, she caught glimpses of the grand piano tucked in the corner, its polished wood reflecting the light from the chandeliers. It was beautiful, and it reminded her of the countless hours she had spent playing the piano in small hidden corners of her life. Music was something she loved deeply, a world where she could escape and express herself freely, far away from the pressure of serving demanding customers. At one of the tables near the center of the restaurant, a group of guests had arrived. Among them was a young woman who carried herself with a certain air of entitlement. She wore expensive clothes that were perfectly tailored, and her hair and makeup seemed untouched by the hours of effort the rest of the staff put into making the restaurant feel special. She laughed loudly at the slightest joke, drawing attention to herself, and spoke in a tone that suggested she believed the entire world revolved around her. The other diners seemed to notice her presence, some with quiet curiosity, and others with barely concealed annoyance. The waitress approached the table, balancing a tray with drinks, and greeted the guests politely. She offered to bring water or anything else they might need before ordering. The young woman waved her hand dismissively, speaking to her friends rather than the waitress. "Oh, don't bother, we'll manage," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. The waitress smiled politely, nodding, and moved on to the next table, where she repeated the same careful attentiveness. As the evening progressed, the restaurant manager approached the young woman's table. There was a quiet sense of formality in the manager's manner, and he explained that the restaurant offered live music in the evenings. He suggested that a short musical performance might enhance the dining experience. The young woman looked around, taking in the surroundings, and then let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "A performance here? From the staff?" she said, her tone loud enough to draw glances from neighboring tables. What could a waitress possibly play? Her friends giggled, egging her on, and the manager's polite smile wavered just slightly. The waitress, who had been nearby, felt her stomach tighten. She had heard such reactions before, but there was a quiet fire inside her that refused to dim. She had spent years refining her skill, and though she had never performed in front of a crowd like this, she knew what she could do. Music had always been her refuge, and now it was calling to her. Despite the laughter, she took a deep breath and approached the piano, her hands brushing against the smooth keys as if greeting an old friend. For a moment, the bustling sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and sure, and the faint rustle of the chandelier as it caught the light. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her fingers find their place on the keys. The first note rang out soft and clear, cutting through the murmur of conversation. It was simple at first, a gentle melody that seemed to float in the air. But as she continued, the music grew richer, more complex, weaving a story that seemed to touch each listener in a personal way. The young woman and her friends initially looked around, confused as if expecting someone to stop her. But the sound was irresistible, commanding attention without demanding it. The notes danced through the room, playful at times, solemn at others, and the audience began to notice. Conversation slowed, forks paused midair, and eyes turned toward the piano. There was a collective realization that something extraordinary was unfolding, and even those who had not expected to be moved felt the pull of the music. The waitress's fingers moved with confidence now, each note chosen carefully, each chord resonating with emotion. She played not for applause, but because the music itself demanded expression. The initial mocking laughter had vanished, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent attention. The young woman, who had laughed so loudly moments before, sat frozen in her chair, her expression unreadable. She could not look away, nor could she deny the impact of what she was hearing. There was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. an unspoken acknowledgement that the music had transcended the ordinary confines of the restaurant. As the piece continued, diners began to whisper to one another, sharing glances that spoke of surprise and admiration. Some raised their glasses as if to toast the skill they were witnessing, while others simply sat, entranced by the melody that seemed to carry the weight of countless hours of dedication and practice. The waitress's heart raced not with fear, but with the joy of sharing a part of herself that had long been hidden from the world. Every note was a testament to perseverance, to the quiet strength required to keep pursuing a passion in the face of skepticism. Even the staff, who had watched her with curiosity from afar, felt the impact of the performance. The restaurant, usually a place of routine and polite service, had transformed into a venue of unexpected beauty. There was a sense of unity among the diners, a shared recognition that they were witnessing something rare and unplanned. The young woman's friends shifted uncomfortably, their previous amusement replaced by a dawning awareness of their own misplaced assumptions. When the final note lingered in the air, it left a silence that felt heavier than any words could fill. The waitress slowly withdrew her hands from the keys, letting the echo fade naturally. The room remained still for a moment longer, as if collectively catching their breath. Then almost simultaneously the applause began. It was not the polite clapping of a routine performance, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation from every corner of the room. Even the young woman, who had moments before mocked her, clapped, though her expression was complex, a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and newfound respect. The waitress allowed herself a small smile, her chest swelling with a quiet pride. She had faced ridicule and yet emerged with her talent shining brighter than the mockery that had preceded it. The manager approached once more, this time with genuine admiration, and thanked her for the unexpected performance. Other diners offered compliments, some even standing to shake her hand. The young woman at the center table shifted in her seat, unable to meet the waitress's gaze directly, yet unable to look away. There was a lesson unfolding in that moment, one that spoke of humility, respect, and the undeniable power of talent that cannot be hidden. As the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the waitress felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The evening had begun with laughter and doubt, but it had transformed into something unforgettable. She had reminded everyone present that talent and dedication are not measured by status or appearance, but by the heart and soul poured into every note, every gesture, every small act that reflects who we truly are. And though the night was far from over, she knew that this moment, this unexpected triumph, would stay with her and those who witnessed it for a long time to come. After the applause settled, a strange calm took over the restaurant. The chatter returned slowly, but it was different now, softer and more thoughtful. Patrons who had been hurried and distracted were lingering, sipping their drinks and exchanging quiet words about the music they had just heard. The waitress stepped back from the piano, her hands brushing over the polished keys one last time. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, a mix of relief and exhilaration washing over her. She had done it. She had shared a part of herself that few had ever seen. She returned to the tables, resuming her duties with a newfound confidence. The guests looked at her differently now, their eyes reflecting curiosity and admiration instead of mere expectation. Some quietly whispered among themselves, asking if she performed professionally anywhere, while others simply smiled in acknowledgement. It was a small but meaningful shift, a recognition that talent could exist in unexpected places. The young woman who had laughed so openly moments before sat in stunned silence. She had been used to commanding attention, expecting others to follow her lead, yet this time she had been caught off guard. Her eyes kept darting toward the piano, and she could not deny the skill and passion she had witnessed. It was as if a wall had been removed, revealing a reality she had never considered. That true talent could be humble yet extraordinary, quiet yet commanding. Her friends, who had initially shared her amusement, were also silent. Their laughter had been replaced by an awkward awareness that they had underestimated the waitress. Each of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, feeling the weight of their earlier mockery. The room felt charged, not with tension, but with the unspoken acknowledgement that something rare had occurred. The waitress moved among the tables, taking orders, refilling glasses and offering small touches of service with grace and ease. Her movements were fluid, each step careful but natural, and it was clear that she was no longer simply performing her duties. She was commanding the space with quiet strength. Patrons began to engage with her differently, asking questions about the music, where she had learned to play, and whether she ever performed outside the restaurant. Each inquiry was met with a humble smile and a brief, honest answer that reflected her dedication and love for music. In the corner, the piano stood quietly, its polished surface gleaming under the soft light. The waitress felt a strange pull toward it, a sense that the music had more to say. She wondered what would happen if she played again, if she let herself fully express the melodies that had been held back for so long. The thought made her heart race, but it was a different kind of nervousness, one that came from anticipation rather than fear. Across the room, the young woman's expression changed subtly. There was a flicker of something new in her eyes, a mixture of curiosity and humility. She leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on her hand, and watched the waitress as she moved from table to table. There was a sense that she wanted to understand, to grasp what had just occurred, but she did not yet know how to approach it. The laughter and arrogance of before had been replaced with something quieter, a realization that she had underestimated someone based on appearances alone. The atmosphere of the restaurant had shifted in a way that was almost tangible. Patrons were no longer just dining. They were witnessing, absorbing, and reflecting. Conversations that resumed were tinged with admiration and respect, and some whispered about how rare it was to encounter someone with such talent and humility. The energy was different, more vibrant, yet grounded in a shared human experience of witnessing something beautiful. The waitress felt a deep sense of connection with the room. Each note she had played, each chord she had struck had reached beyond the surface of polite service. She had touched people in a way that words could not, and it was a reminder of why she had devoted herself to music despite the challenges and long hours. Music was her voice when words were not enough, her way of expressing everything she held inside. It was her gift, and in that moment it had found its audience. A few of the more observant patrons began to watch her as she continued her duties. Their glances were not intrusive but filled with appreciation and respect. They noticed how she moved gracefully between tables, how her gestures were attentive yet unassuming, and how her demeanor carried a quiet confidence born of skill and dedication. Even small interactions, a refill of water, a gentle inquiry about satisfaction with a dish, were imbued with warmth, a personal touch that made everyone feel acknowledged. The young woman finally spoke, breaking the silence that had hung over her table. Her voice was softer now, more reflective than commanding. She asked a question about the piano, about where the waitress had learned to play and whether she had always loved music. The question hung in the air, carrying more curiosity than ridicule. The waitress looked at her and smiled, responding with honesty and simplicity. She shared that music had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember, that she had practiced quietly and played wherever she could, and that performing tonight had been something she had been hesitant about but felt compelled to do. The young woman listened, her posture slowly relaxing. There was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a softening that suggested the beginning of understanding. Her friends also leaned in, genuinely interested now, and for the first time that evening the table was filled with thoughtful engagement rather than laughter. The restaurant manager, observing from a distance, allowed a small, approving smile. He had seen talent before, but rarely with such humility and impact. The waitress continued to serve, but her mind wandered back to the piano. She felt the music calling her once more, not for show or recognition, but because it was part of her, inseparable from who she was. The idea of playing again filled her with both excitement and a touch of anxiety, yet it was a natural progression. She realized that the earlier performance had opened a door, and now she had a choice to either close it or step through fully. The young woman's eyes followed her subtly, a mixture of anticipation and admiration in her gaze. There was a silent acknowledgement that something important was happening, a shared understanding that transcended words. The air between them was charged with unspoken communication, a recognition of skill, courage, and authenticity. It was a quiet moment of human connection that carried more weight than any conversation could. The atmosphere in the restaurant continued to transform. Patrons who had been skeptical or indifferent were now engaged, some whispering encouragement to one another, others simply observing with quiet awe. The shift was subtle but powerful, a testament to how one person's talent and confidence could influence the mood and perception of an entire room. It was a gentle reminder that human experiences are interconnected, that actions and expressions can ripple outward in unexpected ways. As the evening progressed, the waitress found herself moving fluidly between tasks, each gesture measured yet natural. She carried herself with a balance of professionalism and warmth, aware of the effect her earlier performance had on those around her. She was not seeking validation, yet she could not ignore the subtle changes in how she was perceived. There was respect now, an acknowledgement that her abilities extended far beyond the immediate tasks of her role. The young woman at the table observed quietly, her initial arrogance replaced with reflection. She had been confronted with talent and humility in a way she had not anticipated, and it left her unsettled but intrigued. Her friends followed suit, engaging in quieter, more thoughtful conversation. The scene was a gentle lesson in the power of perception, the impact of underestimating others, and the unexpected ways in which respect can be earned. By the end of the evening, the restaurant had settled into a calm rhythm. The night's earlier tension had faded, replaced by a sense of connection and appreciation. Patrons left with smiles, nods of thanks, and lingering thoughts about the experience they had witnessed. The waitress, finally able to take a breath, felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had faced doubt and ridicule, yet had emerged with her talent recognized and her spirit intact. It was a quiet triumph, one that reaffirmed her dedication and the power of sharing one's gifts with the world. In the quiet moments after most of the guests had departed, she returned to the piano once more. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys and she played a few soft notes, not for an audience but for herself. The music was personal, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her joys. The echoes filled the empty restaurant, a gentle reminder of why she had devoted herself to this path and why moments of connection, however fleeting, were worth every challenge she had faced. In that soft music she found peace, strength, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had touched lives in a meaningful way. The next day the restaurant opened as usual, yet the memory of the previous evening lingered in the air. Patrons remembered the soft, enchanting notes that had floated through the dining room, and whispers of the waitress's performance had already begun to circulate. Even the regulars, who had seen countless evenings of routine service, were curious, their eyes scanning for the woman who had captured the entire room with a few simple chords. There was a subtle energy, a quiet expectation, as though everyone knew that something special had been revealed the night before. The waitress arrived early, carrying her tray and apron, ready to take on another day of demanding service. But this morning there was a difference in the way she walked, a lightness in her step and a quiet confidence that radiated from her. The piano in the corner glimmered under the soft morning light streaming through the windows, and she felt the familiar pull of its keys. It was as if the instrument itself was waiting for her, remembering the music that had echoed through the room only hours before. She approached it, letting her fingers brush across the surface, feeling the smoothness and the promise of expression it held. As she prepared the restaurant for the day, she noticed a few new faces among the diners. They were curious, perhaps having heard stories or seen a post about the previous night. Their gazes lingered on her with interest rather than expectation, and some offered polite smiles as they were seated. The waitress greeted them warmly, her voice calm and inviting, making sure each felt acknowledged without drawing undue attention to herself. She had learned the power of quiet presence, of letting her actions speak louder than words. The young woman from the previous night returned, accompanied by a small group of friends. She entered with a noticeable hesitance, her usual confident air subdued. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that the events of the previous evening had left an impression she could not ignore. The waitress noticed her at once, offering a polite nod without interrupting her routine. It was a gesture of professionalism, yet it carried the weight of the previous encounter, a silent recognition of the shared experience. As the day progressed, the restaurant hummed with its usual rhythm, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter and conversation. The waitress moved efficiently among the tables, balancing trays and plates while maintaining an attentive presence. Yet there was an underlying awareness in the room, a sense that everyone was watching closely, waiting for a hint of the extraordinary that had been revealed the night before. Patrons were more patient, more engaged, and some even asked about the piano, their curiosity growing with every glance. During a brief lull, the waitress approached the piano once more. Her hands hovered above the keys and she began to play softly, allowing a gentle melody to fill the room. It was not a performance meant to impress, but a simple expression of the music that had always lived within her. The notes were delicate yet expressive, each carrying a piece of her story, her struggles, and her quiet victories. Diners who had been absorbed in conversation paused, turning their heads toward the sound. The melody was subtle but powerful, creating a sense of calm and connection that transcended the usual distractions of the restaurant. The young woman's eyes widened slightly as she heard the familiar notes. She recognized the skill immediately, and this time there was no mockery, only attentive curiosity. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, watching as the waitress played with fluidity and grace. It was clear that the music was not performed for recognition or applause, but because it was an intrinsic part of the waitress's being. The young woman's friends also watched quietly, captivated by the sincerity and depth of the expression before them. As the melody unfolded, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift again. Patrons who had been casual observers were now fully engaged, some smiling softly, others closing their eyes to absorb the sound. There was a subtle energy in the room, a collective understanding that they were witnessing something genuine and rare. The waitress's music spoke to more than just the ears. It touched hearts and stirred emotions that had lain dormant. It was a reminder of the simple yet profound ways in which human connection can be created, even in unexpected places. The young woman found herself moved by the music in a way she had not anticipated. She had entered the restaurant with a sense of superiority, expecting to be entertained or amused. Yet she was now confronted with a reality that challenged her assumptions. The skill, dedication, and humility embodied by the waitress made her reconsider her own behavior and perspective. She could feel a quiet shame for the laughter of the previous night, tempered by a growing admiration for the talent she had underestimated. The waitress finished the melody, letting the last note linger in the air before fading into silence. She returned to her duties, moving seamlessly from table to table, her presence calm and confident. Patrons whispered quietly among themselves, sharing their appreciation for the music and the way it had transformed the environment. The young woman at the center table remained thoughtful, her friends equally reflective, and there was a noticeable shift in the dynamic of their group. Where once there had been arrogance and mockery, now there was a respectful curiosity and a desire to understand. The restaurant manager watched from a distance, noting the change in the atmosphere. He had always valued talent and professionalism among his staff, but this was beyond what he had expected. The waitress had not only performed music, but had transformed the mood, the perceptions, and the energy of the entire room. It was a reminder of the profound impact that dedication, skill, and authenticity can have on those around us. Throughout the afternoon, the waitress continued her work with a quiet sense of purpose. Each interaction, whether taking an order or serving a dish, carried a subtle confidence that spoke volumes. Patrons responded in kind, showing more patience, curiosity, and engagement. It was clear that the events of the previous night and the ongoing presence of her talent had left a lasting impression. The young woman and her friends remained attentive, their conversation subdued but filled with thoughtful observation. During a brief break, the waitress approached the piano once more. This time she played a slightly more complex piece, allowing her emotions to guide the melody. The music flowed naturally, each note chosen with intention and care. Patrons who had been quietly observing now felt compelled to listen fully, their attention captured by the depth and sincerity of the performance. The young woman, unable to tear her eyes away, experienced a mixture of awe and humility, realizing that talent and grace could not be measured by wealth or social status. As the piece came to a gentle close, there was a soft murmur of appreciation from the diners. It was quieter than the applause of the previous night, but no less sincere. There was a sense of shared experience, a subtle acknowledgement that something meaningful had occurred. The waitress, aware of the impact of her music, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not sought recognition, yet the acknowledgement of her skill and dedication was deeply affirming. The young woman finally spoke, her voice low but sincere. She asked questions about the waitress's training, her love for music, and how she had cultivated such talent while balancing demanding work. The waitress responded honestly, sharing stories of practice in quiet spaces, perseverance through long shifts, and a lifelong passion for expressing herself through music. Each answer was thoughtful and grounded, reflecting a person who had worked quietly yet diligently to pursue her dreams. The young woman listened intently, her earlier arrogance replaced by reflection and curiosity. Her friends followed suit, asking respectful questions and showing genuine interest. There was a transformation occurring at the table, a quiet shift in attitude and understanding. The waitress had demonstrated that true talent carries humility, and that skill and dedication command respect regardless of social standing. As the evening approached, the restaurant began to fill with more patrons, many of whom had heard stories of the previous night, and were curious to witness the music for themselves. The atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation, a subtle buzz of excitement tempered by respect for the space and the performer. The waitress moved gracefully among the tables, her presence calm and assured, aware that her music had already created ripples of admiration and connection. When she approached the piano again, there was a sense of shared understanding in the room. Patrons watched expectantly, not with judgment, but with anticipation for the beauty that was about to unfold. The young woman and her friends leaned forward, ready to listen fully this time, open to the experience rather than resistant to it. The waitress placed her fingers on the keys, allowing the music to flow naturally, a reflection of her skill, emotion, and dedication. The melody began softly, gradually building in complexity and emotion. Each note seemed to carry a story, a piece of the waitress's journey, her struggles, her triumphs, and her quiet joys. Patrons were captivated, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound, others leaning forward with attentive curiosity. The young woman at the center table felt a wave of emotion, a mix of admiration and humility, as she realized the depth of talent she had once dismissed. Her friends mirrored her response, equally moved and attentive. The waitress played for the room. No. As the evening progressed, the restaurant filled with the usual hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes, and the quiet shuffle of the staff. Yet, there was a subtle change from the normal rhythm, a sense of anticipation that hung in the air. Patrons, old and new, glanced often toward the piano in the corner, their curiosity a quiet pulse within the space. The waitress moved through the tables with practiced ease, carrying trays and checking in on diners, but her mind occasionally drifted to the piano. It had become more than just an instrument. It was a vessel for connection, a way to communicate without words, and she felt its gentle call. At the table in the center, the young woman who had laughed so boldly days before was seated again, her friends with her. The earlier arrogance in her posture had vanished, replaced by a subtle humility and attentiveness. She watched the waitress as she moved from table to table, observing her focus, her grace, and the quiet confidence in her gestures. There was a moment of reflection, a realization that she had underestimated the waitress's talent and the impact it could have. It was an uncomfortable acknowledgement, but one that was necessary. As she quietly examined her own behavior and the assumptions she had carried, the waitress paused briefly, allowing herself a moment to breathe, and then approached the piano. She seated herself, hands hovering over the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers. The restaurant seemed to settle in anticipation, as though even the walls were holding their breath. When she pressed the first note, it was soft, delicate, yet it carried a weight that immediately drew the attention of everyone present. The melody was gentle, flowing, and personal, a reflection of the emotions she had tucked away over the years of quiet practice. Patrons who had been chatting fell silent, captivated by the sound. The music was not flashy, nor did it demand attention, but it had a magnetic quality that drew listeners in. Each note seemed to speak directly to the heart, stirring feelings of nostalgia, hope, and quiet joy. Some diners closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them, while others simply watched, mesmerized by the fluidity and emotion that radiated from the piano and its player. The young woman's friends glanced at her, noticing the change in her expression. She was no longer dismissive or bored. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her gaze fixed on the waitress as she played. There was a mixture of astonishment and admiration, a recognition that what she had witnessed the night before was not an accident or a trick, but genuine talent born from dedication and passion. It was humbling, a lesson in the quiet power of skill and the depth of commitment that could exist outside of wealth and status. As the melody continued, the room seemed to transform. Conversations halted, Utensils were set aside, and even the background noises of the restaurant faded into the periphery. The music carried through the space, wrapping around each listener with an unspoken intimacy. The waitress's fingers moved deftly across the keys, conveying emotion in a way that transcended language. It was a performance of sincerity, unadorned and true, resonating with anyone willing to listen. The young woman found herself moved in a way she had not anticipated. She had come expecting to judge or be entertained, yet she was confronted with raw talent and heartfelt expression. There was a quiet shame in recognizing her earlier mockery, tempered by awe and a desire to understand. She observed closely, taking in the precision, the fluidity, and the unmistakable passion behind each note. Her friends mirrored her reaction, the initial laughter replaced by thoughtful engagement, a collective acknowledgement of the skill before them. The melody shifted, becoming slightly more complex, weaving layers of emotion and subtle intricacies that spoke to the years of practice and personal investment in the craft. Each chord was deliberate, each passage carrying nuance and depth. Patrons responded instinctively, some moving slightly in their seats, others closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound. There was a shared energy in the room, a collective response to the beauty and authenticity of the music. It was as if the melody had created an invisible thread connecting everyone present, uniting them in the experience of witnessing something extraordinary. The waitress played not for recognition, but for the expression itself. The music was her voice, conveying stories and feelings that words could not capture. Patrons were aware of this authenticity, sensing the honesty in her performance. It was a reminder that true talent does not need validation. It commands attention and respect simply by existing, by being shared genuinely with the world. Even those who had arrived skeptical or indifferent were drawn in, their perceptions shifting as they engaged with the music. The young woman at the center table felt a quiet shift within herself. She realized that her assumptions, her laughter, and her sense of superiority had blinded her to something beautiful and true. There was an internal reckoning, a recognition that talent and grace were not bound by wealth, status, or social position. Her friends mirrored her reaction, engaging with the moment sincerely, their earlier amusement replaced by appreciation. The scene was a subtle but profound lesson in humility and the importance of recognizing the value in others. When the melody reached its gentle conclusion, there was a moment of stillness. The restaurant remained quiet, the air filled with the lingering resonance of the piano. Patrons absorbed the final notes, some reflecting internally, others exchanging quiet glances of admiration. The waitress allowed her hands to rest lightly on the keys, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the impact of her music. She had shared something deeply personal, and the response from those around her affirmed the power of authenticity and dedication. The young woman finally spoke, her voice soft but sincere. She asked about the training, the journey, and the inspiration behind the music. The waitress responded with honesty, recounting years of practice, moments of solitude, and the passion that had driven her to continue despite challenges. Her words were simple yet profound, conveying not just skill but the perseverance and love that had shaped her talent. The young woman listened intently, her posture relaxed but her attention unwavering. There was an evident shift, an internal transformation occurring as she processed the story and the music together. Patrons at other tables watched quietly, some engaging in hushed conversations about the performance and its emotional impact. There was a sense of shared experience, a recognition that they had witnessed something unique and meaningful. The atmosphere was charged not with expectation or judgment, but with appreciation, reflection, and subtle admiration for the quiet strength of the waitress and her remarkable skill. The waitress, aware of the attention yet grounded in her own presence, continued her duties with poise. Each interaction with diners was handled with warmth, patience, and professionalism, reflecting the same dedication that she brought to her music. Patrons responded with respect and engagement, recognizing the depth of character and skill in someone who might otherwise have been overlooked. It was a testament to the quiet power of excellence, humility, and authenticity. Throughout the evening, the young woman remained attentive, occasionally glancing toward the piano and observing the waitress. Her expression reflected a mixture of admiration, reflection, and quiet humility. She was beginning to understand the value of recognizing and respecting talent, regardless of social standing. Her friends followed her lead, engaging in thoughtful conversation rather than idle mockery, demonstrating that lessons in humility and appreciation can ripple outward, influencing more than just the immediate participants. The restaurant's environment had transformed from a routine dining experience into a space of connection, reflection, and subtle inspiration. Patrons were more engaged, attentive, and responsive, their interactions shaped by the shared experience of witnessing genuine talent. The waitress had created an impact that extended beyond music, touching hearts and prompting reflection on assumptions, humility, and the power of skill combined with sincerity. As the evening drew toward its close, the waitress allowed herself a quiet moment at the piano once more. She played softly, not for the audience but for herself and the lingering sense of fulfillment she felt. Each note was a reminder of her dedication, her journey, and the quiet victories that had brought her to this point. The young woman and her friends observed from a distance, their demeanor respectful and attentive, reflecting a subtle but meaningful transformation. They had witnessed not only music but a demonstration of humility, resilience, and the quiet strength of character. In those final moments, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath, a space suspended between ordinary routine and extraordinary expression. The music, though soft and private, carried the essence of the waitress's story, her skill, and her passion. It lingered in the minds of the patrons, leaving impressions that would endure long after the evening ended. The young woman, sitting quietly with her friends, felt a profound respect growing within her, an acknowledgement of the quiet power of talent, dedication, and authenticity. As the week progressed, the restaurant continued to buzz with activity, but there was an unmistakable change in the atmosphere. Patrons who had witnessed the waitress's performance spoke quietly among themselves, sharing impressions and admiration. Even those who had missed the previous nights seemed to sense that something extraordinary had occurred. The staff noticed a new energy in the room, a sense of respect and anticipation that had not been there before. The waitress herself moved with a quiet confidence, aware of the impression she had made but still grounded and focused on her work. The young woman who had once mocked her arrived again, this time alone. Her usual entourage was absent, and she carried herself differently. There was no pretense in her posture, no exaggerated laughter or gestures. She observed the restaurant with curiosity, her eyes scanning the tables and finally resting on the waitress, who was moving efficiently from one table to the next. There was a hesitancy in her movements, a subtle uncertainty that suggested she had been reflecting on her previous behavior. The waitress noticed her, but maintained her calm composure, nodding politely in acknowledgement before continuing with her duties. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the previous events and the lessons learned. It was a delicate balance of professionalism and humanity, a reminder that respect and recognition often speak louder than words. During a lull in the service, the waitress approached the piano. The young woman watched intently, curiosity and anticipation written across her face. She had come to witness the music again, not as an opportunity to mock, but to understand, to experience the skill and emotion she had underestimated. As the first notes rang out soft and deliberate, the room seemed to hush. Patrons who were chatting paused, their attention drawn to the piano and the story it was beginning to tell. The melody was gentle at first, building slowly, allowing the listeners to become immersed in the flow of sound. Each note carried a sense of intention, a reflection of the dedication and passion that had gone into mastering the instrument. The waitress played with a quiet confidence, not seeking approval or recognition, but expressing the music that had been a part of her for as long as she could remember. It was a performance born of sincerity, and the audience could feel it with every note. The young woman leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, eyes fixed on the pianist. There was a mixture of awe and humility in her expression. She had expected to be entertained or perhaps to dismiss the performance easily, but what she witnessed was far beyond her imagination. The skill, the emotion, and the dedication were undeniable, and for the first time, she experienced the quiet sting of having underestimated someone based on appearances alone. The friends of the young woman, who had accompanied her in previous visits, were absent, leaving her to confront her feelings alone. She observed not only the music but the way the waitress carried herself, graceful, composed, and deeply engaged in her art. The performance was more than just a display of skill. It was a revelation of character, and the quiet strength of someone who had worked tirelessly to pursue her passion despite obstacles. The young woman felt a profound shift within herself, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and introspection. The music grew in complexity, each phrase carefully constructed to convey subtle emotion. Patrons around the room responded instinctively, some moving slightly in their seats, others closing their eyes to absorb the full effect of the performance. The energy in the room was transformed, moving from casual dining to shared engagement, as if the music had created an invisible bond connecting everyone present. It was a reminder that true artistry has the power to transcend ordinary circumstances and touch the human spirit in ways words often cannot. As the piece continued, the young woman felt a quiet admiration growing within her. She realized that talent, dedication, and humility were qualities that could not be purchased, displayed, or feigned. They were earned through practice, perseverance, and a genuine love for what one does. Watching the Waitress play, she understood that her previous laughter and arrogance had been a product of ignorance, a failure to recognize value where it truly existed. It was a humbling experience, one that quietly reshaped her perception. The Waitress concluded the melody with a soft, lingering note, allowing the resonance to fill the room and fade naturally. Patrons remained silent for a brief moment, letting the final chord settle in their hearts and minds. Then slowly, appreciative murmurs and quiet applause arose, reflecting the sincere admiration for what had just been shared. The young woman sat back, processing the impact of the performance, her eyes thoughtful and reflective. She recognized that she had been part of something extraordinary, a rare encounter with genuine talent and human spirit. After the applause, she finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. She asked about the journey that had led the Waitress to this moment, about the dedication required to achieve such skill, and about the challenges she had faced. The Waitress responded with honesty, sharing stories of long hours, quiet practice sessions, and the personal fulfillment that came from pursuing a passion with dedication. Her words were simple but powerful, emphasizing perseverance, humility, and the love of the craft rather than seeking recognition or praise. The young woman listened intently, absorbing each word with a newfound respect. She asked more questions, not to challenge or provoke, but out of genuine interest and curiosity. Each answer deepened her understanding, and she found herself reconsidering not only her previous behavior, but also the assumptions she carried about people and talent. Her admiration grew, tempered by humility, as she realized the quiet strength and character required to excel in such a manner. The patrons around the room were similarly affected, engaging in quiet conversations about the performance and its impact. There was a shared sense of appreciation for the artistry and authenticity on display. The atmosphere was no longer just that of a restaurant. It had become a space for reflection, learning, and connection. The Waitress, aware of the effect of her music, continued to move among the tables with poise and warmth, reinforcing the impression that true skill and grace extend beyond the stage or the performance. The young woman eventually approached the Waitress, offering a sincere acknowledgement of her talent and a quiet apology for her earlier mockery. The gesture was humble, respectful, and genuine, reflecting the internal change that had been sparked by witnessing the performance. The Waitress accepted graciously, smiling and nodding, embodying the humility and kindness that had been evident throughout her work. The exchange was brief but meaningful, a moment of human connection and understanding born from shared experience. As the evening progressed, more patrons lingered, captivated by the music and the quiet strength of the Waitress. Each interaction, whether through conversation, service, or performance, reinforced the themes of respect, humility, and appreciation. The young woman remained attentive, observing not only the music but the way it shaped the environment and influenced the people around her. It was a lesson in the power of talent paired with character, and she absorbed it with quiet gratitude. By the end of the night, the restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, yet something intangible had shifted. Patrons left with a sense of having witnessed something special, something that went beyond ordinary dining experiences. The Waitress, tired but fulfilled, reflected on the impact of her work and her music, recognizing that the influence of authenticity and dedication extended far beyond immediate recognition. The young woman, quietly contemplative, carried with her a lesson in humility and the recognition of talent in unexpected places. In the final moments, the waitress approached the piano once more, playing a few soft notes to herself, a personal reflection rather than a performance. The music filled the quiet room, echoing her journey, her perseverance, and the quiet triumphs that had brought her to this point. It was a private celebration of effort, skill, and heart, a reminder that true accomplishment is often measured not by the applause received, but by the integrity and passion behind every action. The young woman, watching from a respectful distance, felt the lasting impact of witnessing something remarkable, and she understood that the lessons learned that evening would remain with her long after the restaurant doors had closed. The following days at the restaurant carried a subtle excitement, unlike any that had been present before. Patrons who had heard of the waitress's talent began arriving with curiosity, eager to see for themselves the person who had captivated so many with her music. There was an unspoken energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that filled the room and gave every table a quiet vibrancy. The waitress approached her work with the same calm professionalism as always, but there was a noticeable spark in her movements, a reflection of the growing recognition she had begun to receive. The young woman who had once laughed at her now visited the restaurant more regularly, this time with a demeanor that was noticeably different. She observed with genuine interest, no longer attempting to assert dominance or mock the waitress. Instead, she seemed quietly curious, eager to witness the skill and dedication that had left such a lasting impression. There was a sense of humility in her actions, a recognition of the lessons she had learned through experiencing genuine talent firsthand. The waitress moved through the tables, serving food and drinks with her usual grace and attentiveness. Patrons who had previously underestimated her watched with a newfound respect, while new customers arrived with an air of anticipation. She maintained her calm, allowing her actions to speak louder than words. The piano in the corner, polished and inviting, seemed to beckon her once again. It had become a place of expression, a stage for quiet brilliance, and a bridge to connect with those around her. During a slower period in the evening, she approached the piano and sat down, her hands brushing lightly over the keys. The restaurant seemed to quiet naturally, as if sensing that something meaningful was about to unfold. She began to play, starting with a soft, reflective melody that gradually built into something more intricate. Each note flowed naturally, a testament to years of dedication and practice. The patrons listened attentively, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music, others leaning forward to watch the precision and emotion in her movements. The young woman sat quietly, absorbing every note with a mixture of awe and contemplation. She had come expecting to be entertained, perhaps even to find something to criticize, but instead she found herself humbled and inspired. Her perspective had shifted. She now understood that talent was not about showing off wealth or status. It was about dedication, heart, and a love for what one does. The realization settled over her, a quiet, transformative moment that changed her approach to others and herself. The melody continued to evolve, expressing emotions that words could not capture. Patrons were drawn in, their previous conversations fading as they were enveloped by the music. The waitress's performance was not just skillful, it was heartfelt, a reflection of her journey, struggles, and perseverance. Each chord and phrase carried an authenticity that resonated deeply with those who were present. It was a reminder that true artistry comes not from seeking approval, but from expressing something genuine and meaningful. The young woman's friends eventually joined her, observing with newfound respect and attentiveness. Their laughter and mockery from before were replaced by quiet reflection and appreciation. The waitress's music had transcended social boundaries and preconceptions, reaching each listener on a human level. It was a subtle, powerful lesson in humility, the importance of recognizing talent and the beauty of genuine expression. When the piece came to a soft conclusion, the room remained in quiet reverence for a few moments. Patrons reflected on the experience, exchanging small glances and whispers of admiration. The waitress allowed herself a modest smile, acknowledging the effect of her performance without seeking recognition. She had shared something deeply personal, and the response was a testament to the impact of authenticity and dedication. Afterwards, the young woman approached the waitress with a mixture of nervousness and sincerity. She expressed her admiration, offering a quiet apology for her previous behavior and acknowledging the skill and character she had witnessed. The waitress responded graciously, a gentle smile and a nod affirming the importance of humility and the lessons learned. The interaction was brief yet deeply meaningful, a quiet exchange that spoke of respect, growth, and shared human understanding. As the days went by, word of the waitress's talent spread beyond the restaurant. Invitations to perform at local events, private gatherings, and small concerts began to arrive. These opportunities were not sought aggressively. Rather, they were a natural result of her skill, dedication, and the lasting impression she had made on those who had heard her. The waitress approached each opportunity with the same grounded humility she had always maintained, focused on the music itself rather than the recognition or applause. The young woman continued to visit the restaurant, now engaging in thoughtful conversations about music, art, and personal growth. She had learned the value of humility, the importance of respecting talent, and the profound effect that dedication and sincerity could have on others. Her friends followed her lead, demonstrating a similar transformation. The restaurant, once a space of routine dining, had become a place of inspiration, connection, and subtle life lessons, all centered around the quiet brilliance of one dedicated individual. The waitress's life began to change in small but meaningful ways. The recognition she received from patrons and invitations allowed her to expand her performances beyond the restaurant. Yet she remained grounded, continuing her work as a waitress while embracing opportunities to share her music. Her dedication to both her craft and her role in the restaurant reflected a balance of practicality and passion, showing that success and fulfillment often come from consistency, humility, and love for what one does. Each performance, whether for a small group of friends or a larger gathering, carried the same authenticity and heart. The waitress played not for fame or wealth, but to express herself and connect with those who listened. The effect was profound as she touched hearts and inspired others with her music. Patrons who had once doubted or overlooked her now admired her deeply, understanding that talent and character cannot be measured by appearances or social standing. The young woman, now a regular visitor, watched and listened with sincere respect. She had transformed from a figure of mockery to someone genuinely inspired, demonstrating the power of experience and humility to change perspective. Her admiration for the waitress extended beyond music. It encompassed the dedication, kindness, and authenticity that she had witnessed. The lessons she had learned were subtle but enduring, shaping her behavior and understanding of others. One evening, after the restaurant had quieted down, the waitress played a personal piece at the piano, soft and introspective. The music filled the room not for an audience but for herself, a reflection of her journey, her persistence, and the quiet triumphs she had achieved. The young woman watched from a respectful distance, absorbing the depth and sincerity of the performance. It was a reminder that true accomplishment is measured not by external recognition, but by the dedication, heart, and passion that one invests in their craft. The restaurant, once ordinary in its routine, had become a space of inspiration, reflection, and connection. Patrons left with more than a meal. They carried with them the memory of music, the demonstration of humility, and the quiet strength of someone who had worked tirelessly to pursue her passion. The young woman and her friends left with new perspectives, humbled and inspired, understanding that talent and dedication could not be judged by social status alone. The waitress, quietly returning to her routine after each performance, reflected on the journey she had undertaken. From long hours in quiet practice to moments of doubt and ridicule, she had persevered, letting her skill and authenticity guide her. Her music had become a bridge, connecting people, inspiring admiration, and teaching lessons without words. In each note, each chord, she expressed not only her talent but her heart and dedication. The experience had changed her life, opening doors to new opportunities, recognition, and growth. Yet she remained humble, focused on her craft and the connections her music fostered. The young woman who had once mocked her had become a symbol of transformation, illustrating the power of humility and the lessons that come from experiencing genuine talent. Together, in the subtle exchanges and shared moments, they demonstrated that respect, dedication, and authenticity are the qualities that leave lasting impressions, far beyond wealth, status, or expectation. As the final notes of her evening performance faded into silence, the waitress felt a quiet satisfaction. She had touched lives, inspired admiration, and shared her passion with the world, all while remaining true to herself. The young woman, sitting in respectful silence, understood the depth of what she had witnessed. It was more than music. It was a lesson in humanity, humility, and the enduring power of talent paired with dedication. The restaurant, the piano, and the music had become symbols of possibility, transformation, and the quiet brilliance that resides in those willing to follow their passion.